Okay, so a lot of people have asked me to talk about the Elucidator from Sword Art Online. It's one of the most requested videos on my channel, and the question is simply, would it be practical in real life? And in case you don't know, Sword Art Online is a novel, manga, and anime series about a virtual reality MMORPG where players end up trapped inside because the crazy developer disabled the logout function. And in order to get out, they have to defeat the final boss. And if they die in the game, they also die in real life. The main protagonist is Kirito, who prefers to do things lone wolf style, single player in an MMO setting, a bit odd. And he's a bit of a power gamer with a pretty high level character. And he's also somewhat socially awkward. In other words, the ultimate nerd. He obtains the sword called Elucidator, a level 50 drop, pretty powerful. Supposedly a one-handed longsword, which is a very common misnomer. An actual longsword would be something like this, designed primarily for two-handed use. At first I was going to make a joke about how the Elucidator is somewhat confused, has a bit of an identity crisis, doesn't really know what it wants to be, one-handed or two-handed sword. If you go by the blade length and of course the classification inside the game, in the anime, it's a one-handed sword. But the grip is definitely that of a two-handed sword. But at the same time, there is also the good old Langmesser, which is an actual historical sword, well, knife. They actually called this long knife, which is the same kind of thing. It's a one-handed blade length, and the historical techniques were also mainly for one-handed use. But at the same time, you can see that the grip clearly offers you enough space for two-handed use as well, if the need arises. So it is a bit of a hybrid, I suppose. It can be whatever it wants to, or rather whatever the user wants to. So either way, it doesn't matter too much. Of course, it's a little weird to evaluate the practicality of a fantasy sword in a video game inside a fictional story. It's a little convoluted, but well, people were interested in it, asked me to do it, so here we go. The general design is definitely not one of the worst I've seen. I mean, there are pretty crazy things, of course, in fantasy. This here is not the most practical design you could come up with, but it's not bad either. And by the way, before anyone mentions Men-at-Arms, yes, I've seen the video. I'm aware of the reproduction of the Elucidator. But the thing is, smashing glass and stabbing the blade into a hay bale doesn't really tell you anything about whether or not it's practical. And they did seem to struggle a little bit with it. Seeing how they swung it, it looked like it was not too well balanced and too heavy. But those things can be fixed. The thing is, a good swordsmith who wants to make an actual fighting weapon has ways of adjusting the weight and balance to make a variety of designs work. The handling characteristics of a sword are of course very important. If you can't handle it well in a real fight, well, you die, quite frankly. And it has to be nimble. You have to be able to move it quickly, change direction, and to respond very quickly to an attack, counterattack quickly, change direction, all those things. And for that, of course, weight and balance are important. Balance is the most significant, I'd say, because even a sword that is technically relatively heavy can be made to feel comparatively agile in the hand with the right balance. So far pretty obvious, but another very significant characteristic of swords is how they vibrate. If I smack the pommel here, you can see the blade vibrates. I don't know how well you'll be able to see that, but there are two centers of percussion. So spots where there's no vibration. Here is one. So you can see the blade vibrates both in front of that spot and behind it. And another one is here. And that's exactly where you want it, because you do not want the grip to vibrate directly where you grip it. That needs to be a vibrational node. If it isn't, then you're going to get a lot of hand shock. It's going to be very unpleasant to use. And worst case scenario, improper vibration in the handle can actually split the handle itself. But all these factors can be fine-tuned. Weight, unless the design is grotesquely oversized, balance, vibrational nodes, that can all be adjusted simply by fine-tuning how much material is where. In case of the blade, the balance is largely determined by the shape. The profile taper that you see here, blade is wider near the hilt and then tapers down. That is something that brings the balance further back. And also the distal taper, meaning that the blade is thicker here than it is there. And of course also the thickness of the guard, size of the pommel, all of that comes into play. And yeah, a good swordsmith can adjust these factors to make a sword very practical. All of this could be applied to this design to turn it into a practical, useful sword in real life. The guard is a little funky, obviously. Not a huge problem, but with weapon designs, it's always good to adhere to the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And something like this works. Yeah. Simple cross guard. This one here also has a guard on the side called the nail. This gives you a lot of versatility. You can catch a blade on the flat, parry like that. If it slides down, it's still going to be caught by the nail. You can catch a blade with the cross guard. You can strike with the guard. Things like this. That one, yeah, it still gives you options for parrying, for striking, obviously. It is a little strange in that it seems to be made of separate pieces that kind of look just glued together or something. There are no visible rivets, so on an actual real sword you would probably most likely attach them with rivets or weld them, I suppose. However, there's one problem, at least if the information on Sword Art Online Wiki is correct, namely the blade is supposed to be obsidian, and that would be a very bad idea, very bad. Unless it's somehow magically held together, but yeah. The thing is, if you have to rely on this generic magic placeholder, it's kind of lazy design in my opinion. Not a big deal, that's just me, but yeah, you could make it a little better to not have to rely on generic, just, oh, it's magic, it works. But anyway, so what about obsidian? It's volcanic glass, it's a product of rapidly cooled lava, and it has some characteristics that are really not suitable for a sword. It has a higher tensile strength, which means that it has a lot of resistance against deformation or breakage if equal opposite force is applied to it. So if you were to try to tear it apart, that wouldn't work so well. The problem is it has a very low compressive strength and a non-crystalline structure. What that means in practical terms is if you had an obsidian blade, you put it on a wooden block and you took even just a rubber mallet and whacked it a couple of times, it would probably break. It's very, very brittle. And of course you can't have that in a sword. A good sword, in order to prevent breaking, needs to be flexible. But obsidian can't do that. It can't flex and spring back like a tempered steel blade, or bend instead of break like a bronze blade, for instance, or iron. It would just shatter. Obsidian blades do exist in history, but they were generally pretty short, just knife-sized, because that's the best you can get away with. Otherwise, a longer blade just would have too much stress on it when using. It really wouldn't work unless it's magically enhanced, but at that point it could be made of cotton candy and the magic would hold it together. It doesn't matter. Personally, I prefer Kirito's other sword, the Dark Repulser. It just looks somewhat more aesthetically pleasing to me, looks a little more practical as well. That one would definitely work, no doubt. It also looks nice and slim. It's always good to see swords that are not overly thick or otherwise extremely bulky and oversized in fantasy. But really don't have anything more to say. I could ramble on for quite a while, but who wants that, right? So hope you found this interesting, and thanks for watching.